Good afternoon. City of Murfreesboro Planning Commission, November the 21st, 2012. We'll call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum. Chairman Lamb's out of town, so I'll preside this afternoon. First item of business is to approve the minutes of October 3rd and October 17th. Any addition, correction from staff or members? If none, we'll approve those minutes. First item of business is old business. Zoning request for approximately 10.64 acres to be zoned CH simultaneously with annexation along 231 North Lebanon Highway at Cherry Lane. Mr. Jerry Alsop, applicant. Ms. Ely?
I'll be taking care of that, Mr. Young. During its regular meeting on October 3rd, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on this zone application to rezone the property at the northwestern corner of the intersection with Cherry Lane and Memorial from RS-15 to Commercial Highway. Actually, I said RS-15. The Planning Commission also considered a public hearing to consider annexation of the property, and it would have come in with an interim classification of RS-15 in the absence of that zoning request. After the public hearing on the annexation, the Planning Commission recommended favorably for the annexation. However, after the public hearing on zoning, the Planning Commission voted to defer action to allow the applicants and their agents to meet with some of the affected property owners adjacent to it. One of those properties is owned by Mr. Ridley. Mr. Ridley owns a historic property, a renovated property that I think has quite a bit of historic significance in our community. And in recognition of that, there was some interest in seeing what could be done to offer some protection to him that may even go beyond what's possible with zoning. After the meeting, Mr. Huddleston, who was working with the applicants, did endeavor to get with Mr. Ridley, but unfortunately Mr. Ridley has had some health issues that have caused him to be unavailable until earlier this week. Yesterday I met with Mr. Huddleston, Mr. Ridley, Mr. Kidwell, representing Mr. Ridley, and the applicants to discuss the matter. As I told them, I was to viewed my role as a facilitator to facilitate discussion, but not to be an advocate for either side. I think there was a very good discussion. I think that there was a lot of discussion about the ability to adopt restrictive covenants to offer additional buffering to Mr. Ridley's property, perhaps quite a bit more than a buffer that would have been in the zoning ordinance. For instance, there was a discussion of a 50-foot and then a 100-foot buffer from Mr. Ridley's property line to offer some protection to the historic property, to be accomplished by a restrictive covenant. This is something to go beyond what the city could do with zoning, because our type D buffer, which would be what would be required, would be only a 15-foot buffer. There's also a lot of discussion about uses permitted in the commercial highway zone, how appropriate they would be at that location. As the meeting wound down, I think it was Mr. Kidwell who summed it up and said, I think he could sum it up to say that his applicant was, or his client was very much against the rezoning, very much against changing the use of the property. But at the same time, it was about any type of development that'd be near his house. Some of the uses that were permitted in the commercial highway were not viewed as objectionable. It was more of a general development concern. Mr. Kidwell is present. I think he may want to offer an opportunity to speak briefly with the Planning Commission to sum up basically his client's position. Mr. Bill Huddleston is here also. He's here to answer questions on behalf of the applicant. And I think since this is a little bit of an unusual situation, this is not a public hearing, but it would be more of a report based upon the issues that were discussed at the public hearing, and it caused that item to be deferred.
You want to hear a report from Mr. Kidwell? Mr. Kidwell, if you'd like to make some comments on your report, sir.
Good afternoon. I hope not to be too repetitious nor anything but brief. Previously, Mr. Ridley and I have both spoken to this commission and made some of our problems evident. Right now, all I'm asking is that this commission be refreshed on the law. You may be way ahead of me, and I know that. But for annexation, if the annexation is challenged, and I'm just reading from the law here, an annexation ordinance is unreasonable for the overall well-being of the communities involved. We say that as being our position, that it is unreasonable. We see no benefit to the community itself. It seems to be really a benefit to the landowner, and we don't see it for the rest of the community. Secondly, if it's challenged, an ordinance is challenged, such as this, it says the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens and property owners of the municipality and territory will not be materially retarded in the absence of such annexation. We want the annexation to be considered. You know, I don't know that much about annexation, but most of the time I see a pretty great area to be annexed, not just 10 to 12 acres. And it's an unusual situation, it seems. The other thing I would like to bring to your attention is, as I said, all of you may be well ahead of me on this, but I do want to bring it to your attention. There is spot zoning that sometimes is illegal. And to give you the quick legal definition, it says spot zoning is the process of singling out one small parcel of land for use classification totally different from that of the surrounding area. We submit that this is different from the surrounding area, very different. And it's for the benefit of an owner of such property and to the detriment of other owners. That gets to be subjective as to how much it could be detrimental to the other owners. You've heard Mr. Ridley speak. I don't intend to repeat all that. That's the way he feels. And as I've just said, as this case says, this is the very antithesis of planned zoning. I've looked at several other cases, so to speak, and they all say the same thing. So I'm merely asking you to consider that, because it does seem to be a situation where only one or two people are benefited, and that's the owners of the property. It does not seem to benefit this community. It does not seem to benefit the adjoining people. And contrary to what we sometimes find when you annex or rezone, what's the purpose? We have out there on 231 North, and every one of you I know must have traveled that route, we have convenience stores, drug stores, groceries, everything you can imagine. So we submit there's not a real need for this annexation, certainly not a real need for the zoning. That's all I have. I hope I haven't been too repetitious of what we've previously done, but I do ask you to consider those factors.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Huddleston? Couldn't find him. He needs to stand there.
Good afternoon, Vice Chairman Young and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Bill Huddleston with Huddleston Steel Engineering. I'm here on behalf of the applicants, Mr. and Ms. Alsop, who are in the audience today. Didn't come here to argue law with Mr. Kidwell, but I will say we had a very nice meeting yesterday. We met for 2 hours with Mr. Kidwell and Mr. Ridley, and we talked about three things, because my clients are very sensitive to Mr. Ridley and his property, and we don't want to do anything that will hurt him or his property. So we talked about basically three things in our meeting yesterday. First thing we talked about was an enlarged buffer along his property. We talked about 50 feet in most places, except right up against where the Alsop's barn is. We would propose to leave that barn where it is, so it could be part of a buffer, if you will. And we also proposed that in the back part of the Alsop property, if we were allowed to have self-storage, that we would have a 100-foot buffer off the Ridley property for that. The second thing we talked about was a restriction on uses. We went through the entire Chart 1 of your zoning ordinance, use by use, and we marked out what uses would be appropriate and we marked out what uses would not be appropriate and left in there what uses would be appropriate. So what we intend to do with those proposed uses is file a set of restrictive covenants that would not allow certain uses on any of our commercial highway zone property that would be not desirable for Mr. Ridley or that area. And our plan is to, if you recommend approval today, to formalize that list, allow Mr. Kidwell and Mr. Ridley to review it, and then we would actually record those restrictive covenants between the second and third reading of City Council. The third part of those covenants, not only would we restrict some uses for the entire commercial highway zoning, but we would also restrict even more uses and not allow even more uses right up against Mr. Ridley's property. In other words, the first 200 or 400 feet, depending on the use, would not allow certain types of uses that he said he didn't want to be beside. Now, Mr. Kidwell brought up some points that we wrestle with from time to time, whether this is for the overall well-being of the community. This would benefit the community because it would provide commercial services in that area. It would also increase the tax base for this community. He mentioned the health, safety, and welfare of the area. Well, that's why your rules are in place. That's why we go through site plan approval. That's why you have a very knowledgeable and dedicated staff to review whatever we propose so that the health, safety, and welfare of the area is not jeopardized. He also talked about spot zoning. Of course, then he said we had a lot of shopping centers in the area. So, you know, it's not spot zoning. We're proposing much the same uses that you'd see all along Memorial Boulevard. The purpose of this is to allow my applicants who live in that area and who have lived there a while and who have invested in that area to enjoy the highest, to have the right to enjoy the highest and best use of their property. I'll be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Any questions? I have a question, Mr. Hudson or Mr. Aylock. What is our plan for the extension of Cherry Lane to 840?
We are currently in the process of, I think, design for the road. We're trying to get approval from the state and federal government for an interchange, actually the state for the interchange on 840. And once that location is secured and nailed down, we'll begin with the final design of Cherry Lane all the way over to 840. The period of time is undetermined. I'd have to defer to Mr. Richardson for the exact details, but that is a project that he is actively working on and attempting to keep moving forward. Because of the involvement of the state and possible federal government with some of the funding, it's the kind of thing that does take some period of time, but it is actively in the works.
And this property would be located at one end of the total project?
Yes, sir, and at the end it is already improved.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Huddleston? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Members of the Planning Commission, just real briefly, while we did have discussion about restrictive covenants yesterday, I made it very clear to them and all the parties that if there are restrictive covenants adopted, the city would be in no position to enforce them. While they would be an effective tool, the city would not be the one who would enforce it. Our zoning would be enforced as our zoning is. Although there is great merit to restrictions, and particularly for the buffer, because I think it would add some protection that the city is not able to do. I wanted to make that clear to you and to them again, although I made it clear several times yesterday.
Ms. Jones?
And I was just going to verify, basically, that at this point, as far as the Planning Commission is concerned, we would not be going back and looking at annexation because we already made that decision, and it's moving forward to council at this time.
That is correct. I did advise the Planning Commission when the matter was deferred on zoning that I would hold the matter of annexation back until the matter of zoning was determined so that they could proceed through the process at the same time and minimize the number of meetings that Mr. Ridley or others who are interested would have to attend. That way they could consider both the annexation and zoning at the same meetings. So the decision has already been recommended favorably. We're just waiting for the matter of zoning to be determined and how that will be addressed.
Mr. Ayla, have we, the Planning Commission and the council, used this methodology before to tweak the uses and the restricted covenants and the setbacks in other properties in the past? And if the conclusion wasn't reached satisfactory, the council holds it up at second reading?
The Planning Commission hadn't used the methodology because we don't enforce their covenants, but we have recognized that they've been worked on, and we have been willing to encourage the applicants to move forward in that manner, whereby because there's a leap of faith on both sides. Obviously, the owners don't want to put of record restrictions until they get almost to the end of the zoning process, and the applicant doesn't want to go along with it, or the affected other properties don't want to go along with it until they know what the restrictions are. As a matter of good faith, we've seen applicants who are willing to voluntarily ask the council to hold up their items until they got their homework finished.
Well, and so in this meeting yesterday, y'all did, as Mr. Huddleston said, you went through this whole list, and Mr. Kidwell and Mr. Ridley were both there and discussed different uses that might be restricted from this area, and different buffers and things that would go along depending on the use type that went along with it. That was part of the meeting yesterday.
Yes, ma'am, sure was.
And really has nothing to do with whether we decide one way or the other, but it's part of what they were doing to try to work together on it.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other comments, questions, suggestions, motions?
At this time, just to recap for the Planning Commission, I see that there's a sort of science. It's like, what are we supposed to do? The Planning Commission has three options: approve it, deny it, or defer it. We have already deferred since October 3rd.
Yeah, and defer would only be if we thought there was some other, something that we could do one way or the other. So
I'm going to add one other alternative that I didn't point out. Because this application was advertised for commercial highway, it is possible to recommend commercial fringe instead of commercial highway, because commercial fringe is a less intensive commercial zone. You could not recommend industrial, for instance, because it's more intensive, but you could recommend commercial fringe, and that approve it as commercial fringe, deny it all, or defer. That's your three options, or basically the fourth option.
Let me ask Mr. Huddleston, Bill, are you,
Yes.
if we recommend the alternative option of downing it to CF as opposed to CH, is your client still willing to put the restrictive covenants down that would be appropriate in that situation?
I'll ask him.
Please.
Can you still put a convenience store there? Because that's what it's about. You got 2,000 people.
In the spirit of cooperation, they said they would agree to that.
Commercial fringe would meet the needs of what you're needing and add that extra level of insulation.
Yes, sir.
With that being the case, that's what I would move that we do.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, motion passes. All right. Next item is zoning application for 12.6 acres along Memorial Boulevard at West Thompson Lane to be rezoned from commercial highway to PRD, Arlington Venture Partnerships applicant. Is it easy to you?
Again, Mr. Adler.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And I'll take care of the next one as well. The Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on November the 7th with regards to this plan development application. The application is to rezone the property from commercial highway to PRD to allow the development of a multifamily complex with, off the top of my head, I think that's about 243 dwelling units. At the conclusion of the public hearing, the Planning Commission, I think they were ready to move forward, but I asked that the Planning Commission hold up any action to allow the plan staff to address what I consider a lingering traffic opportunity and/or concern. The property is located west of Memorial, south of Thompson Lane, having access directly onto Memorial and to Thompson Lane. We have an opportunity to have access on the Kings Ridge Drive if the property owner to the south would cooperate. And I wanted to investigate if that was a possibility. After 2 more weeks of effort, I have been unable to get that type of cooperation, and we're now ready to see the Planning Commission move forward without that connection. We viewed the street connection, and I say we, it was really the traffic staff as well as the planning staff viewed it as a beneficial connection because it would diversify the traffic management. But because the property owners are not interested in working it out, staff doesn't have any ability to make them. So we recommend that you move forward and make a decision whether or not to approve this application. We have with us Mr. David Code representing the Arlington Venture Partnership. One of the things, just real quickly, I want to clarify, I think there may have been some confusion about these apartments. These are going to be some Class A apartments. They're going to be very nice. They're going to be well managed. I've had an opportunity to review with the applicants their approach to management. It is my understanding, after talking with them, that they do background checks. They do have leases. They do manage their property for security. They have a management company for their other apartment complex in town, and actually they're viewed as a well-managed company. They're located on St. Andrews Drive. I did ask them to be present if there were any questions you had about how they're going to manage the property. I think that's a very important part of multifamily. A well-managed multifamily use can be a very good neighbor. A poorly managed apartment complex or any residential development can be a very bad neighbor. So I wanted to make sure in my mind I felt comfortable with their approach. I do. I'm familiar with their management company, and they do well. They have a representative here to answer questions if you have any about how they would manage the property.
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Taylor, if I'll start. My understanding that there will be no cut-through at Kings Ridge Drive.
None is on this plan, and the property owner to the south that owns the property between this property and Kings Ridge have not been willing to allow it.
Now, my understanding that the neighbors in Regency Park did not want to cut through in this particular place coming through. Is that
the gentleman who resides in the Regency Park area who spoke indicated he did not want to have a cut through.
Okay. All right.
Otherwise, everything looks in good order.
I got a couple more questions. I just didn't want to. Mr. Code's here, I believe. Could I ask Mr. Code a question? Mr. Code, I don't want to repeat everything that was said by Mr. Adelot, but there was some misinformation on the management of the opportunities for this property about leases and background checks, and I want to make sure that for the record that you state what your intentions are on this.
Yes, sir, and we've actually brought copies of the applications. The management company for this is actually the same management company for St. Andrews Place. So they do two things. They do application, which does the background check, and then they actually do the leasing contracts. And so there are two documents and two processes that go through with every applicant. Everyone who is over 18 has to sign the lease itself to be a part of that. So there is a lot of depth that goes back. We have to follow all the federal guidelines and regulations. It is well documented, and be glad to share these documents, which will be the documents the applicants and contracts with individuals will have to submit.
The other item I had, and then I'll turn it back for questions, is the fence along the school property. My understanding there's a chain link fence there now.
Yes.
What do you plan to
Leave the
that,
existing
move it?
fence and then add additional buffer as shown on our plans on our side of the property, but we would leave the existing fence.
So there will be no cut through or back and forth between the school and the properties?
That is correct.
There's not a gate involved?
That is correct.
All right, I've monopolized your time. Your turn. Yes, sir.
And please correct me if I'm wrong, but y'all did a traffic study with respects to this property. Is that a correct statement?
That's a correct statement. Mr. Bill Huddleston prepared that traffic.
Okay. And as part of that traffic study, it was determined that it was not necessary per se to connect to Kingsridge Drive. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct. We have two accesses onto Memorial Boulevard and one access onto Thompson Lane. So we have three ways to get both access for residents in and out of the property, but also for emergency vehicles such they are needed.
Thank you.
Questions? Thank you, Mr. Cody.
Thank you.
If there's some additional, we'll call you back up.
Yes, sir.
There's no other questions, Mr. Chairman. I'd make a motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. All right. The next item is a zoning application for 21.65 acres along New Las Casas Highway to be rezoned from PCD to commercial highway. Kroger Real Estate applicant. Mr. Adlai, I think you've got this one also.
Yes, sir. The subject property is the Kroger's and the outparcels that surround it that are owned by Kroger's at the intersection of New Las Casas Highway and Rutherford Boulevard. This property is adjacent to the Garrison Cove subdivision. The application is to rezone the property from the current PCD, planned commercial development, to commercial highway. The purpose being to allow a more variety of uses within the shopping center. There are lease spaces that are adjacent to the Kroger's itself that are part of the shopping center. There's an unbuilt pad that goes with it that someday may be built, and there are several outparcels that go along with it. The application was originally made by somebody besides Kroger. It was made by a different development company, and as it moved forward, Kroger's bought the plan out and became the applicant when it was originally approved. However, they didn't upgrade the uses permitted. Their objective was to develop a grocery store. Well, they've been unable to find tenants and users and buyers for some of those outparcels. Their intention, of course, was to restrict the property so that it would still be compatible with the Kroger shopping center. They didn't really expect to make it completely market rate. They expect to dominate the property because they have a grocery store and they have a very big stake. They own the store. This is not a leased store by Kroger's. The application was made. We had our public hearing on November 7th. After the public hearing, the Planning Commission deferred action. Part of that was to allow the applicant to meet with the neighborhood association for Garrison Cove. Garrison Cove has a very strong, very active, and very well organized owners association, and they were very interested in meeting. We met last Friday. We had another 2-hour meeting. Mr. Huddleston was there along with Mr. Steve Kroger. No relation to Kroger's, the grocery store, but he just happens to have the same last name spelled slightly different. We had a very good discussion. I think that what I would report to the Planning Commission is and this would be subject to any change by the owners association that might think differently, but I think the mood was that they were willing to work with the Kroger's developers, that they want the shopping center to be successful. They want it to be a place that serves their neighborhood. It is already a place that they shop. It's a place they enjoy. They enjoy and appreciate the protections that the planned commercial development offered. If they can secure those protections through restrictive covenants, they're interested in working with the applicants. There were certain uses that they were more concerned about, particularly those that would be close to the subdivision. They felt, as the board, that they wanted to offer protections to their development that really need to be considered. Certain uses, for instance, they were very much concerned about uses like automotive repair adjacent to their subdivision. That would be permitted generally in commercial highway. They went through the list of uses permitted in Chart 1 at a time, and they marked off quite a number that they would not be comfortable with. They also indicated that there were quite a number that they were very comfortable with that were not permitted on the list. For instance, a plant store, a florist. That was something that they talked about wanting to have that's not permitted right now. So there was a little bit of things that they saw that they would kind of like to have. At the conclusion of the meeting, I think that they expected this to move forward with commercial highway, and that before the matter got to council for a public hearing, that they would begin to see a more refined list, more than just marks on the paper. Now they'd want to see it typed up. Also, there would be some additional restrictions about separation. Some parts of the development would be restricted different than others. The parts that were more remote might be a broader use than others. They were willing to move forward with the idea that before second reading, they would see the restrictions developed, and before third and final, they'd be recorded. And I believe I have accurately reported what I observed. And there, again, my role was not to advocate. My role was to answer questions of a technical basis on process, on what the zone ordinance contains, also to offer definitions of what uses are. Often people do not realize what something is defined in our zone ordinance, and if it's a defined term, I wanted to point out what it was so there'd be a clear understanding and no misunderstanding of what uses. So I think I've accurately reported. Mr. Huddleston was again involved in that discussion. If you want to hear from him, he's here and can offer a report. I think there may be some people from the Owners Association. If they are, they may want to raise their hand to show that they're here. Otherwise, I think that they're going to be watching it on TV and showing up at the council meeting.
Ms. Jones.
These out parcels, are these actually sold as separate lots of record, or are they leased from the Kroger group?
It could be either way. Right now, they are all owned by the Krogers. They are owned by Kroger's, one of their maybe subsidiary corporations, but it's Kroger's that owns it. None of them have been sold. I will point out that there are two parcels that are not colored, that are already a zone commercial fringe, that are adjacent to it. They are owned by a different property owner, and they were never part of this subdivision. They were always a different property owner.
Because as long as they're part of the Kroger subdivision, then those, I'm wondering if they can make those restrictions apply if they sell it as an out parcel. Can the new owner put new restrictions, different restrictions?
Changes to restrictions are always a dilemma. No restrictions should be written where there can't be any possible change, because something will come along, just as sure as we're sitting here today. But I do think that the Kroger's, from my understanding and discussions with them, are very intent upon enforcing restrictions on land that they sell, if they place restrictions on it, particularly as it relates to their profitability and their ability to function as a grocery store. I am familiar with another situation, for instance, the Georgetown Kroger. There's an out parcel in front, and it was restricted when it was sold, and it has limited the uses that are permitted on it. Quite simply, Kroger's did not want to have certain things in front of their store and certain uses that would compete with it. And to this day, there is no drugstore on that lot, although conventional wisdom would almost tell us it's a perfect site for one. There's not a convenience market there either, because it would compete with some of the things that Kroger's does. So they are going to be selective. Now, I will defer to them to tell you how they would go about it and that sort of thing.
And can you tell me kind of what the procedure would be if we said, well, you leave it like it is, and if you have a use, somebody's interested in an out parcel, it's a use that's not permitted on the current zoning, and you want to modify the PCD to include that particular use, how much more does that add? That's like a redo of the PCD and adds 6 months to the process, or what happens there?
Yes, ma'am. That would constitute an amendment to the Plan Commercial Development, and that has been part of the heart of the matter. A rezone or amendment to the plan development will require about 120 to 150 days, depending upon what time of year you start the process. If you began today, it would probably be about 150 days because you'd wind up in Christmas and Christmas holidays. On the other hand, if you start in February, it may be 120 days. And that is a time frame that I have mapped out and charted, literally hundreds of times over the past several years.
Okay, I don't like that option.
But I'm going to add for people who don't always understand what the process is, and this is for helpful to all of us to think about. A rezoning requires an application, $600 application fee. That's really the easiest part. It requires a work session with the Plan Commission. It requires a public hearing with the Plan Commission, a recommendation to council, the council to consider it and to schedule a public hearing by the council, and 3 readings on the ordinance, and then 15 days for it to become effective. The time between the meetings always passes. The time between getting to the council and scheduling the public hearing, there is a required notification period that is almost because of the days that the paper comes out, it's going to be about 21 to 22 days. So the due process of it lengthens it, even when there seems to be a lot of support for it. Frankly, I have been able to compress it where we did it overlaps down to about 45 days, but I have been always of the opinion that I don't want to violate zoning protocols and processes, even though it's legal, if it's a routine matter. I would rather, because when we change our protocols, it causes people to be suspicious that things are going on that they don't understand. And it also causes people to get in a hurry and drop the ball. I will be glad to do it on a big league economic development opportunity like Amazon or something of that nature that our city leaders feel is important to the community, but I'm always cautious.
Any other comments, questions?
One more time I'll add, I did discuss at the planning that if there are restrictive covenants, there would be no ability for the city to enforce them, and I think that the board was very much aware of that and has no illusion otherwise.
I'll make a comment. I feel confident that if what you just didn't say wasn't true in reference to the way you portrayed the meeting, that some of the folks from Garrison Cove would be here. So with that, I would like to make a motion that we approve.
Second motion. Have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. The next item is the consent agenda. This is where I get to read 9 items, and y'all might want to take a mental break here for a second. But at the end of that, we'll see if anybody wants to pull these off and discuss them or whatever. But the first item is the Liberty Station preliminary plat for 16 lots on 5.23 acres, zone RS10, along Andrew Jackson and Sam Houston Avenue, Howard Wall developer. Mr. Daylight, should we take these? You want to
Read the whole consent agenda,
Okay,
start
all
to
right.
finish, and then we'll adopt it with one motion.
All right. Item number 2 is St. Andrews Place, Section 6, preliminary plat of 30 lots on 8.4 acres, zoned RS10, located along New Salem Highway, Decker and Belt Developers. Item number 3, Blackman Meadows, preliminary plat for 11 lots on 4.03 acres, zoned RS12, along Blackman, Burroughs Lane, Blackman Meadows Venture Developer. Next item is Blackman Meadows Section 3, preliminary plat for 6 lots on 6.29 acres, RS12 along Blackman Burroughs Lane, Blackman Meadows Venture Developer. The next item is Seward's Crossing Section 2, preliminary plat for 12 lots on 2.69 acres, zoned RPD, located along Effie Stewart Drive and Sally Stewart Drive, Milton Investment Groups, LLC developers. Muirwood, Section 2, Phase 2, final plat for 38 lots on 10.26 acres, zoned PRD, served as an outside sewer customer, located along Ambrose Lane and New Ames Drive, Tennessee Contractors, Inc., developer. Next item is Salem Glen Crossing, Section 1, final plat for 21 lots on 3.4 acres, zoned RZ, located along Oval Hessen Lane and Salem Glen Crossing, Decker and Belt developers. Next item is Summersby, Section 2, final plat for 25 lots on 6.08 acres, and the re-subdivision of lots 33 and 35, zone PRD, and located along Applecross Court and Strickland Drive, Summersby's LLC developers. And the last item is Blackman Meadows, Section 1, final plat for 15 lots on 6.02 acres, zoned RS12, located along John Lee Lane, Blackman Meadows Ventures developers. Are there any items on this consent agenda that the Planning Commission would like to pull out and discuss?
Could you read those over? Yeah, could you?
Yeah, you want me to read them over? I'm going to start from the back and go to the front this time. No, I'm not reading them over.
If there are no questions, Vice Chairman, I would move for approval and adoption of the consent agenda.
Second.
Have a motion and a second for the adoption of the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. All right, the next items is plats and plans. The Reserve Section 6, preliminary plat for 19 lots on 6.87 acres, zone RS12. Did I skip 6? I'd skip 6. I beg your pardon. Yeah. All right.
It's not like you're getting paid extra.
I'm out of breath. The next item is item 6, the Gateway Design Overlay. Oak Shopping Center Phase 2, Lot 2, a preliminary plat for 1 lot on 2.6 acres, zoned LI and GDO, located along Medical Center Parkway, Mike Wilson Developers. Ms. Ely.
Thank you. Very good job. Doing well. Our first and only item under our Gateway Design Overlay District portion of our agenda is to review a preliminary plat for property that's part of the Oaks development. You have several maps in your packages, but I also have an ortho map that shows the location of this site. And you can see that I've pointed at it with the arrows, this site. The property is approximately 2.6 acres, and it's zoned LI, Light Industrial District, and it is located within our Gateway Design Overlay District, and that's GDO 3. The property owner would like to be able to subdivide a portion of this property off and sell it. However, the property owner has indicated to us that their intention is to allow, or for any future development on this property to be consistent with the master plan that we've approved with this development. So the type of development we would see is what you see, the larger, of course, buildings that are running north and south. What we see in the future will look like that. There's nobody interested in it at this site. They are just looking at possibly selling that land off. So, of course, to do that, a preliminary plat must be submitted to demonstrate that we can provide city services to this property. So you have before you the preliminary plat. It was in fairly good order initially when submitted, and we had some minor comments. The surveyor was able to address all of our comments, and you can see that on the plan. This would be both the initial and final design review for this preliminary plat. So if you do recommend, or if you do decide to approve this plan, then like you'll see the final plat come come back to you, I believe, next month. So they're ready to move forward with subdividing this property. If you have any questions about the plans, I'd be glad to answer them.
Any questions, comments from Ms. Ely? What are the wishes of the Planning Commission? Wish I quit reading.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval subject to all staff comments.
Second.
Have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Next item is plats and plans. The Reserve Section 6, a preliminary plat for 19 lots on 6.87 acres, zoned RS-12, located on Clovercroft and Fallcroft Drive, New South Developers.
Thank you, sir. Our first item under plats and plans is to consider approving a preliminary plat for Section 6 of the Reserve Subdivision. There is a, of course, map of the property in your program books or in your packets, and it shows the property is zoned RS-12. And that has a minimum lot size of 12,000 square feet for each residential lot, and those lots do meet that minimum lot size. The preliminary plat is for 19 lots located on 6.87 acres, and that's along Clovercroft Drive and Fallcroft Drive. There's also, you will see in your packet, the preliminary plat that was initially submitted is different than what's on the table before you. We had several comments in this, in the staff comments. You can see they're rather long. We did meet with the engineer team and with the developer on this property to discuss our concerns. They were actually able to address our concerns. There's been a change in the way the stormwater is being managed. Before, there was a pond located behind some of these lots that we thought could be improved on or maybe relocated, and so they're able to use an existing pond and just make some modifications to it so they don't have to have a wet area behind these lots. So actually, the plan that's before you is in much better shape, and staff feels more comfortable with this plan. They will need to, or any approval that you may give, I'd like to recommend that you make it subject to all staff comments, because there are some minor comments they still need to address, specifically about the homeowners association and some of the drainage structures. Other than that, the plans are now in relatively good order, and staff would recommend that you approve them subject to all staff comments.
Any questions?
If there are no questions, I'll make a motion that we approve, subject to all staff comments.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. The next item, item B, is Galveston LLC, Section 1, Master Plan and Preliminary Plat for 4 lots on 6.3 acres, Zone CF along the New Salem Highway, Galveston LLC developer. Ms. Elia.
Thank you. Yes, our next item is for a subdivision for properties located along New Salem Highway or State Route 99. This is the master plan and preliminary plat for 4 lots located on 6.3 acres. The properties are currently zoned CF, and that's Commercial Fringe District. So this is a commercial subdivision. We have not received any development plans for any of these lots, but I think that it's been indicated to us that they might have a user interested in Lot 1. We don't know the user yet, but just to point out to you that I think this is moving forward because they're looking at subdividing that Lot 1, which is 1.4 acres of property off. This is the preliminary plat, and so, of course, it would be subject to your approval. There are some items that still need to be worked out on this plan. One of which is that, of course, this plan is affected by the major thoroughfare plan because on our major thoroughfare plan, and TDOT will be making improvements to New Salem Highway or State Route 99. We'll be widening that and improving its layout. One of the conditions I want to make clear is that we would expect for them to dedicate any necessary right-of-way for those future improvements that are on a major thoroughfare plan. Mr. Sam Huddleston and I took opportunity this morning to look at the construction plans, TDOT's construction plans for this section of roadway, and we did see that there would be some additional right-of-way needed. I think maybe the engineer was under the impression there wouldn't be, but we can show those plans to them, and we would expect that this plan should be, any approval should be subject to dedicating that necessary right-of-way for those improvements. Something else that Mr. Huddleston and I looked at, Mr. Sam Huddleston and I looked at this morning, was the drainage. The way this plan functions, it relies on a plat that you reviewed this summer, and that's for Three Rivers commercial lot, which is located on Cason Lane. As it's designed now, we believe that will work when the Three Rivers commercial lot plan is implemented. At this time, the plat hasn't been recorded, so those easements that are located on that lot aren't yet dedicated, and of course there has been no development on that property. So what we would like to do, being staff, is to add a condition that the implementation of this plan that we're reviewing today, which is Galveston Commercial, must come after the implementation of the Three Rivers Commercial Plan, or they will need to redesign a drainage system that will work without the implementation of that Three River Commercial Plan, and we want to hold all permits until that's worked out. So I expect no delays if we do see the landscape business develop as anticipated. This should flow fine, but if this property wants to develop before that property on Cason Lane, then we'll have to see some changes. And I think that if you're comfortable with it, that's something that we can approve the planning, or we can review the planning and engineering department and approve and make sure that functions well and it's not doesn't cause a negative situation there. So those two additional comments we would like to add to the staff comments that you have before you. I think there's still some minor issues that they need to work on, but nothing that's really, nothing that's really major. It's just cleaning up the plan. So if you do want to approve this, we'd like to ask that you make it subject to all staff comments, including the two I made about the drainage and about the right-of-way for New Salem Highway.
Sir.
If Three Rivers is not developed before and we ask them to change the drainage plan based upon the fact that Three Rivers hasn't been developed, will that affect the Three Rivers drainage plan once Three Rivers is ready to start?
We'll look at it. We will, if it doesn't hinge on the Three Rivers, we will make sure that it doesn't negatively impact the Three Rivers commercial site when we review the plan.
Mr. Halliburton, part of what's going on is that there's an existing drainage conveyance across both properties. The Galveston property is upstream of the Three Rivers property. The Three Rivers developers intend to reroute the conveyance across their property to come in at a more convenient crossing so it doesn't cross to the center of the property. We've approved that plan. They have not built the ditch and they have not filled their property as they expected. I expect that someday they will want to. Until that happens, there is existing drainage that drains across their property as in a natural way. It pre-existed any development in the area. If these guys, Galveston, get ahead of them, then their drainage is going to have no alternative but to be dumped into the existing system. What we're concerned about is that one or the other make sure it gets into to it at the right place. We want to be cautious to coordinate their plans. That's sort of our function as a planning staff, to coordinate the developments. We see what could become a inconvenience, but not a problem. We don't see anybody getting flooded over this. We just see the water being turned loose without the improvements upstream. Either way, there is existing water coming across the property today. It's just a matter of the proposed constructed systems. We won't see a site plan on this lot until later. When we do, and that may be on lot number 1, that's what we're expecting. We may need to see some, maybe if they get ahead of the Three Rivers, we may need to see some accommodation in their plan for that interim period. And I'm confident our Mr. Huddleston, Sam, and Ms. Ely being able to coordinate those.
I don't have an issue with the coordination. I can understand from the developer standpoint how it may or may not impact how they cost this thing and who their buyer may be based upon what easements may need to be there or not. So please correct me if I'm wrong. It just sounds like it could be a guessing game.
It will be a guessing game.
Okay.
Because until the downstream system is in place, and until we get a site plan, we're uncertain of how we've got to coordinate it. And until we see something that is more specific, Bear in mind, the plan that you're seeing is a preliminary plat. The preliminary plat shows the basic layout for the subdivision and the roadway improvements and the utility extensions. So it's not a individual lot plan like we would see with the site plan. We will have some uncertainty until we see something more specific. We see the framework for a proper conveyance and a proper development, but we don't see the exact plan for how those actual site plans are going to coordinate, because we don't see those site plans yet. And we can guess a little bit, but we'd rather react to a specific plan and see it right.
Okay.
And then you have the point of who starts first and how long will the back end subdivision take to be resold and those questions. I don't know the answer, and I don't think he does either.
Right.
It seemed to me that there was several items, Ms. Ely, that you wanted to make sure that would be approved upon the staff's recommendation. Feel comfortable that you can address all those?
We do.
Even though there were several of them that they were all relatively minor and could be addressed at staff level?
I do. I feel comfortable.
Thank you. Any questions, suggestions, comments, motions?
Mr. Vice Chairman, if there are no other questions or comment, I would move for approval subject to all staff comment, both written and oral, made today.
Thank you.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, motion passes. The next item is Walmart Supercenter, final plat for 4 lots on 59.62 acres, zone PCD and CH along Highway 231 South and Joe B. Jackson Parkway. Walmart Estate Business Trust developer. Ms. Ely?
Thank you. Our next item is to consider a final plat for Walmart Supercenter located on South Church Street. I made this a regular agenda item just because I wanted to make clear to anybody who might be maybe listening or interested in the project that this isn't for the Memorial Boulevard site. This is South Church Street. This is property that, and I believe it was May of this year, we reviewed a site plan for the property that was consistent with the PCD zoning and approved that site plan. Also at that same time, we reviewed and approved a preliminary plat. And as a condition of the property owner receiving any permits, they were required to submit the final plat prior to receiving any permits, and then they'll be required to record a final plat to create the lots prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. So Walmart, the developer, has applied for building permits from Building Codes Department, and I placed a condition on the request saying that I wouldn't give the permits until, of course, they submitted the plat for us to review. And that's what you're seeing before you is a subdivision plat. That is consistent with the site plan that we reviewed, is consistent with the preliminary plat we reviewed. The site plan creates 4 lots on 59.62 acres. The property is zoned both PCD, Planned Commercial District, and CH, Highway Commercial District. The Walmart property is zoned PCD, and then there's some remaining property that's zoned CH for which we saw a zoning change request and will in the future see some development plan for those CH properties, but we don't have anything at this time. So this plat was in relatively good order when it was submitted to us. We had some minor comments just about some information being added to the plat. Some changes such as County Farm Road has now been renamed to Joe B. Jackson Parkway, so we wanted them to update the plat to show that correctly reflect the name of that street. So now this property is on the corner of Joe B. Jackson Parkway and South Church Street, or Shelbyville Highway, or Highway 231, however you'd like to call it. They have been able to address all of our comments except for we are working on street naming. That's something that we, even as late as this morning, we've been having conversations with Mr. Matt Taylor with SEC, and he's been able to talk to Mr. Blomley and our E911 department to make sure that the names for these future right-of-ways are consistent and do and are within the guidelines of the E911 street naming protocol. So he's been able to make some changes to the plat and come up with some names that will work, although that's not on the plans that are in front of you. So staff feels comfortable with the, if you would like to make a decision to approve these plans, I would like to recommend that you make it subject to all staff comments so that we can just clean up that street naming. I'd like to answer any questions you may have about this preliminary, or this final plat.
So you've got it down pretty much to street names then.
Yes, sir.
Comments?
Mr. Vice Chairman, I make a motion to approve, subject to all staff comments.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Thank you. Our next item is Rose Lawn Funeral Home, site plan for 9.173 square foot funeral home on 3.21 acres, zoned LI, located on Northwest Broad Street, SCI Management Developer. Ms. Ely?
Thank you. Our first site plan we'll be reviewing this afternoon is for a new funeral home located on an existing cemetery site. The site itself is much larger than the 3.21 acres. The 3.21 acres is really the site that's being developed for the funeral home. The funeral home is approximately 9,173 square feet, and the property is zoned LI, Light Industrial District, so the use is permitted within that zoning district. It's located along Northwest Broad Street on the northeastern side of Northwest Broad Street. You can see that it's on the map before you. And where I've put the arrow is the location of the funeral home. The proposed building is one story, and it will have a cultured stone base with a precast concrete cap and fiber cement siding. And I can show you an illustration of the proposed building. It's on the screen now. You can see that it's a nice-looking building. It even has a cupola, Mr. Young. And I think that was it was a recommendation on the part of the developer, but then I told them that it would probably be well-received by our planning commission. So you can see there's the building there. The site will have access to two rights-of-way. It'll have access to North Star Drive and Northwest Broad Street, and the site plan will reflect that. There will be some modifications they'll need to make to the right-of-way, and of course those would require the submission of any of construction plans, which will be reviewed by the Planning and Engineering Department to ensure that it is compatible with our standards, and also any changes to Broad Street will require TDOT approval since that is a state highway. The developer has been able to address most of our staff comments. You may have seen that I had a question about solid waste management. Typically, when we see a site plan, we're going to see a dumpster or some sort of solid waste enclosure for the site, and the owner has asked to not have to install a dumpster on this site because it's part of an overall larger site that has an existing dumpster. So they've submitted a letter to me. I'll pass it around and then pick it back up at the end of the meeting, stating their solid waste management plan. They do have in place the plan where they have maintenance staff who circulates the site, picks up solid waste, and takes it to the dumpster they already have on site. So I don't have a problem with it since this will be part of an overall larger development, and they do have a good management plan in place. So, of course, if you're comfortable with that, then that would be a change in what we normally see. So they'd like to use their existing dumpster, not build a new one. We also saw that there were several landscape comments that weren't addressed, and there were some questions on the part of the developer. We, as you know, require perimeter planting yards along the perimeter of sites. And so for this site, it would be our expectation and consistent with our past recommendations that we would see a perimeter planting yard along the perimeter of this property. It wouldn't be adding, quite frankly, that much landscaping. I think when we talked to the Urban Environmental Department, I think maybe 12 trees plus some shrubs. And if they have some existing trees on site that are near this, they could get credit for those existing trees. So that's a comment made in our staff comments, and staff would recommend that you make approval subject to all of our staff comments, including our comments about landscaping. I think there are just a couple more small items that need to be addressed, but they are small, and if you do condition any approval on staff comments, then we'll be able to take care of those. For example, they need to show that they're irrigating all the planting area, and so they just need to revise the plan a little bit to show that. But really, the plan is in fairly good order, so if you have any questions about it, I'd be glad to answer it. Otherwise, we are ready for your recommendation or your decision. I keep saying recommendation from years of zoning and annexation, but it's your decision. I'm sorry.
Any questions, Ms. Ely?
I don't mean to be the one. I got one. Playing devil's advocate here, what if the funeral home business down the road is sold to a different operator than the cemetery, but we don't have a dumpster site on this property. Are they going to be required to put a dumpster site if the ownership changes?
I think there'll be a couple items that come up. I'm basically memorializing this in our record so I can say we've talked about it, and I hate to use this against them in the future, but we do have property maintenance regulations, and if they're not maintaining the property, then we would require them to put in some sort of something. I guess they could do it inside. If we don't see that there's any kind of violation outside, then maybe they could do it inside, but they would have to then submit a site plan showing the dumpster with the proper enclosure and screening, because of course we require a dumpster to be screened with a masonry wall and landscaping as well that you can't see through and would be taller than a dumpster. So we would ask for a site plan to show that, but if it's sold and we don't see trash piling up on the site, I don't know that it would come to our attention.
When we see if the funeral home were to ever sell separate from the cemetery, we would require a subdivision plat. The subdivision plat would give us an opportunity to ring that bell, and I think Ms. Ely's minutes would then be pulled out to show that this is something we discussed and want you to address. That's the kind of thing, occasionally we do have to run into that, and that's what we do.
And my point would be is that the business could sell, but the property wouldn't, meaning the operator of the funeral home would be something different than the property owner.
I see your point.
Yeah.
And that may be the kind of thing that it may be more of a property maintenance issue, just like she said.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments?
Make a motion to approve, subject to all staff comments.
Second motion.
Have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Next item is General's Run, a site plan for 69 multifamily units on 7.26 acres, zone PRD, located on south of Compton Road Building Group developer. Ms. Ely, you continue.
Thank you. Trying to stay organized. Okay. So our next site plan is for General's Run, which is located south of Compton Road, and the property will consist of 69 multifamily units on 7.26 acres. The property is zoned PRD, Planned Residential District, and it was zoned PRD several years ago. However, you have recently reviewed a PRD amendment to that plan, so they've asked to make some changes to the program book that would govern the zoning on this property. That was approved both at the Planning Commission and City Council, and I expect for the zoning change ordinance to become effective in 2 days from now, so it would be appropriate for us to go ahead and review the site plan at this time. Of course, any approval of the site plan should be subject to the ordinance becoming effective, and I believe that's just standard protocol. The site plan is consistent with the approved PRD. We've looked at the program book, and it is consistent with that. We did have some minor comments, and it looks like they've been able to address most of our comments. They submitted a preliminary irrigation plan like we've requested, but we only got one copy, and I guess maybe it was used to make a highlighter. It was created by using a highlighter, but it shows the area that will be irrigated. It'll need to be modified. Of course, we can catch that before permits. Generally, we just ask for a preliminary irrigation plan at this time, and then when it goes to codes, I look at those plans and make sure that they follow through with all the requirements and conditions that we've placed on the property, and that'll be one of them. We also asked for some preliminary architectural plans, because that's what we ask for with each site plan, and they did submit, I think, some information that came right out of the PRD program book, so I'll go ahead and pass this around too. And the proposed buildings, again, are consistent with the PRD zoning that is on the site. We did ask for sidewalks in front of some of the larger buildings, and they have requested to not add those sidewalks in front of those buildings, I think because of the the driveways would cause some sort of elevation change, and so we talked about it, and staff is comfortable with that. However, we would like for them to add a sidewalk along the drive aisle that is on the side of units 25 and 26. It's not a very long section, but it would add to the connectivity and pedestrian circulation of the site, and it would be something that I think would be very positive for people who live there and keep them from walking in the road. But it wouldn't be as much sidewalk as we initially requested, so that would be something different than the staff comments that I have before you. They This site plan is in relatively good order. Staff would recommend your approval be based on all site or on all staff comments if you do want to decide to approve this site today. I'd be glad to answer any questions. I know we have representatives of the developer in the audience who would be glad to answer questions you might have for them as well.
Any questions, comments? Ms. Ely, there's adequate right-of-way if Compton Road is ever enlarged.
It is adequate right-of-ways in place. Oh, they will be building a right turn into the site. So it'll have a little bit of a deceleration lane and then a right turn. Of course, TDOT would have to approve any changes to Compton Road since it is a State Route 268.
And Ms. Healy, did you say no sidewalks?
There are sidewalks in the development. You can see if you look at the plan that it's in front of all the smaller units. So I had added the comment to add the sidewalk in front of the larger units, which would be 46 through 69. The larger units have individual driveways, and so they're requesting to not put the sidewalks in front of these larger units. I think maybe because it would go from patches of grass to driveway, patches of grass to driveway. Also, sometimes we see that the driveways would actually be parking on the sidewalk. So with the depth of the driveway, if there were cars parked there and the sidewalk ran across the driveway, the cars would actually be blocking it anyway. So they've asked to not do that, not to place the sidewalk along those larger units.
Thank you.
In proximity of the intersection of Memorial and Compton and Thompson, how far east of that location is it?
I think it's at least a mile.
I was going to say at least at least 3/4 of a mile.
3/4 of a mile.
Yeah, at least.
It's immediately in front of the reserve subdivision. I would like to note, too, you had some public hearings, and you heard from the homeowners of the single-family lot that's it's that little notch in the corner on your zoning map. And we did look closely at the drainage plan to see how they can improve this. And we listened to the owners, to the Hall family, and about their concerns and what's actually going on their property. And, I mean, we want to see that improved, and what they had some legitimate concerns. So when we reviewed this plan, we looked at the drainage pattern and how they can improve the and be a better neighbor, improve the drainage. They will have a buffer immediately adjacent to the Hall property, and just on the inside of that buffer, they'll have just a small swell that will carry water around the site to keep it from draining down into the Hall property. So we did look at that, and I know that you had asked us to at the public hearing.
Ms. Ely, initially when this property was bought, there were some maintenance issues that were not taken care of by the previous owner, and I think the staff went and checked on those and got those back up to where they should be. Is that correct?
It is. It would be our expectation, especially somebody making an application of zoning, that their property needs to not have a property maintenance violation. Periodically, I've checked with the codes department, and of course, I myself have drove out there and taken photos. And some of the maintenance problems aren't really the fault of the current property owners. Some people think that they can go on vacant land and dump trash. Unfortunately, it becomes their responsibility because it is their property, so they need to maintain it. So we have been keeping an eye on it. I don't know what condition it is today, but I will say that we have been communicating with our codes department, sending photographs if we see any kind of violations to them. And I know that the property owner has expressed an interest in maybe developing this property that will help reduce the future occurrence of these property maintenance violations. And I think that the property owner has heard us loud and clear about how that is a concern for the residents of Murfreesboro, that they do keep their property in an orderly fashion.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, motions? I'd like to turn in the wind a little longer.
Vice Chairman Young, I'll make a motion that we approve, subject to all staff comments.
Second motion.
Have a motion and second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Our next item is Dollar General Master Plan and Preliminary Plat for 3 lots on 13.01 acres, Zone Commercial Highway along Joe B. Jackson Parkway and Manchester Pike, Turner and Associates Realty Developer.
Thank you. Our next item is to consider reviewing and approving a master plan and preliminary plat for a commercial subdivision located north of Joe B. Jackson Parkway and west of Manchester Pike or Highway 41. The property is Zone CH, which is Highway Commercial District, and is approximately 13 acres. The property owner has received a request also to develop, or from somebody who wants to buy a portion of property and develop it as a Dollar General. The next item on our agenda will be to consider the site plan, but before we do that, we're going to look at this plat to see if the lot itself meets our minimum standards. The plat was in very poor order when initially submitted, both the plat and site plan, but we did talk to the developer and the property owner and their engineering team, and they were eager to work with staff and improve their plan and improve it, especially considering what it was before. So we did meet with them. They were willing to, meet our standards. I think they probably even wanted to exceed our standards. And we weren't able to meet with them until after I published these comments. So these staff comments mostly refer to the initial plan that was submitted, which is the small 8.5 by 11 you have in your packet. Shows that initial plan. What you have before you has been revised. And so they have been able to address most of our concerns with the master plan and preliminary plat. We, of course, wanted to see that any of these future lots would be able to receive services, water, sewer. We also wanted to look at any street connections for these lots. And this is close to an important intersection in our community, of course, Joe B. Jackson Parkway and Manchester Pike. So we also look at reducing the number of driveways, and also, while reducing the number of driveways, having them located in the best place from that intersection, because this is a very sensitive area, and I know Mr. Valachandra has been watching it very closely. So our recommendation from the initial plan was that there be a shared access drive, which they had shown on Manchester Pike, and a shared access drive on Joe B. Jackson Parkway, so that the lot, if you're looking at your plat, you can see Lot 3, it could have a connection to Joe B. Jackson Parkway, although that property is not contiguous with Joe B. Jackson Parkway. And the same would be true for Lot 1. Lot 1 would have access to Manchester Pike, even though it's not contiguous with Manchester Pike, and that would just, it would be better for our street system and the people who would be visiting the site. It is staff's expectation and our recommendation that the access drive that you see, well, you don't really see the drive, you see the easement, the access easement that you can see on this plat, that it be constructed with the development of the very first lot. I expect that the first property to be developed would be Lot 3, because that's the Dollar General. But I just want to make it clear that we expect that connection to Manchester Pike and Joe B. Jackson Parkway to be done with the first lot that's developed, because it's important as for service delivery and for the folks who might be visiting the site. I'm going to make that same suggestion comment with the site plan, but I'll just, as a matter of, I guess, driving it home and reiterating, it is the expectation of staff, and we would like for you to add that comment that the connection be made with the first site that is developed, the construction of the first site, which we anticipate to be Dollar General. But if something were to happen, or another lot, whatever lot that may be. Other than that, the plat seems to be in fairly good order. They do need to work on the subdivision plat name. It seems like a minor issue, but I know it's very important to our Rutherford County Property Assessor and Register of Deeds, so we can work with them and make sure they name this appropriately according to those guidelines. But other than the access for the lots and the subdivision name, I think that the plat's in fairly good order, and would recommend any approval you make be subject to all our staff comments.
Any questions? The developer has a very good understanding that we want these roads, these access points in first. Is that obviously you've made it very clear to him?
I believe so. And I hope if he didn't have it, he does now.
Yes, ma'am. Any questions?
Seeing none, I make a recommendation that we approve subject to all staff comments.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Our next item is Dollar General site plan for a 9,005 square foot building located on 1.2 acres, Zone CH, along north of Joe B. Jackson Parkway and west of Manchester Highway. Turner and Associates Realty Developers. Ms. Ely, we'll continue this.
Yes, sir. This is the site plan for a proposed Dollar General located along Manchester Pike, and you can see the property, the site plan that is before you. Of course, the site plan that we're looking at now, again, is a little different. We had them basically flip the building. You see the access point, what's on the screen now is what they had initially submitted to us, but then you'll see what you have now has a shared access drive. The drive has gone from the north side of the property to the south side of the property. By doing that, they are able to line up the access and share that access drive with the other two parcels, so all three parcels can use that shared access drive. Mr. Iglott.
Ms. Ely, the one on the television camera is not correct, and the one on their iPad is not correct, but the one that's on the paper copy in your stack is correct.
That's what.
And the Planning Commission members may want to just take a moment and get to that, because I think seeing the correct one will help you to understand part of what Ms. Ely is going to discuss.
I thought I said that, but maybe not as effectively.
It'd be near the bottom of the stack.
So what's on the screen and what's the 8.5 by 11 in your packet is the previous version, and the large 24 by 36 plan that you have on your desk is what they're proposing, which is much better than initially submitted. And I know our meeting was on Friday morning, and I know that the design team worked all weekend to improve the plan, and I think it is much improved. There are still some items that need to be addressed on this revised plan, but again, we didn't get this revised plan until Monday, and so I haven't been able to prepare any comments for that. So it would be our expectation, and we would like for you to make a condition of approval that the access drive that you can see running along the south of the building be connected all the way from Joe B. Jackson Parkway to Manchester Highway, so that connection would be there. That would be helpful for when they have, you can see the dumpster, solid waste enclosure is located along the south side of the building adjacent to that access drive. Any delivery, that's also where the delivery of their goods will be made. So any trucks that will be coming in, maybe off of Manchester Pike, can circulate the site, can provide their service, and then just drive straight to Joe B. Jackson Parkway going to the interstate. So it will help with their service delivery. In addition to any patrons who may visit the site, they'll be able to, if they need to get on Joe B. Jackson Parkway, just travel the access drive and leave the site. We did ask for some truck simulations with the associated data. They did provide me with a truck simulation for, I think, their delivery vehicle. They did not provide me with the associated data, and that's something that we can get to look at it. I know Mr. Balachander looks at that very closely. We want to look at how fast they're going when they're making these turns and see if this is really something that's realistic that works, or if it's just something on a plan. Initially, I don't think we have too many concerns with their service delivery and how they're negotiating the site, and I can circulate this truck turn simulation, but we would like that associated data. And we also would like to have a truck turn simulation for the solid waste vehicle. Just take a look at that, and then that associated data as well. And if the applicants have questions, I know he worked during the weekend, and I tried not to, so he couldn't ask me any questions. So I think that there's the plans were prepared, not being able to get some clarification on some items, and that's just one of those items that needed clarification. I also included an elevation of the building in your program books, and I made a comment that it actually didn't match the footprint of the building, so for them to submit something to us, what it will look like, and they've submitted this rendering of the building. Of course, the final plan would be submitted at Codes Department. I think the building looks very similar to what we see in other areas. It does look like they're using yellow. I think that might be just something that doesn't translate well on paper, because we wouldn't expect to see a yellow base and yellow brick with this red building. But I can work with them, and generally Mr. Monty Turner, who is a developer for the site, is very good to work with, and he communicates through the whole process, and he communicates effectively with me, and generally he'll send somebody up from the masonry industry with some samples, and we look at those and just make sure that they do fit into our community. And I don't believe he meant to have a yellow building. I believe that maybe buff or some other type of material is what he intended on using. I didn't see him in the audience, though, so I'll just go with that assumption. Okay, Roy Dell is their design engineer. He's not the architect on the project, so if we did have questions and wanted him to come up, then we can invite him up whenever you do have those questions. There's still some landscaping that needs to be worked out. We saw when we looked at these plans, there's an overhead line along Manchester Highway. So when there is an overhead electric line, we can't have shade trees. Although shade trees are required in a perimeter planting yard, you can't have them underneath those lines for obvious reasons because they grow into those lines. So they can substitute those shade trees for ornamental trees, and that's what we would expect to see. So we'll need for that to be changed on the landscaping plan. They also, I think, are missing a couple trees, but really when I spoke with Mr. Barbie and Mr. Adams in the Urban Environmental Department, it's something that we believe that we can work with them later if you're comfortable working out the details of the landscape plan in the future. So this site is being reviewed, and I meant to mention this initially. It is being reviewed as an integrated site plan subdivision, and that's come up several times. So that just basically means is that they are submitting a subdivision plat and a site plan at the same time and have intentions of moving forward. Basically, the purpose of the subdivision plat is for this site, and so that just clarifies our process, our review process, and how we're looking at this. So as an additional condition we'd like to place, which is not in your staff comments, we'd like to say that all these outstanding issues must be resolved with staff prior to the submission of plans to the Building and Codes Department. So generally, when a developer leaves this meeting, they can go to Codes Department and submit the plans there. I and Mr. Robert Lewis show up at that meeting, and we look at those plans and make sure that they are consistent with what you've approved. And if you've made any conditions of approval, we look through the list and we make sure that those conditions have been addressed. If they haven't, we hold permits up. What we'd like to ask for is before they even submit to Building and Codes, they come back to us with the revised plans, and we can see if they meet all of our standards, meet or exceed our standards, and that they've been able to address all of our outstanding issues. That would include the access drive, the landscaping, the truck turn simulations, the building, if that's something that you'd like me to look at as well, but prior to them submitting to Building and Code, so there's no confusion later when they submit and the plans plans are held up by me because they don't comply with what you've asked for them to comply with. So we would like, if you do decide to approve the site plan, for it to be made subject to that condition.
Any questions, comments? Here again, Ms. Ely, you have enumerated several items that need to be corrected, and you feel confident that staff can do this? I
do, and if there is an unwillingness on their part to work with us, then we'll bring it back to you.
Okay.
But I do feel confident that we can work with them through these.
There was a lot, but they all seem relatively minor.
I think so.
Ms. Jones?
Did we discuss, are they going to be able to turn left on Highway 41 out of this site? Can't tell. That's a little, is that an island?
There'll be a full access on Highway 41,
Both ways.
so left and right.
That's just a striped-off area. That's not a median. That is a striped-off area in the street. It already exists. They'll be opening it up, doing some restriping in the street. In the access drive, often Mr. Lamb asks about a right and a left, and it's got both a right and left exit lane.
We're going to take care of Mr. Lamb, believe me.
That's his signature.
There is a right
See
turn.
those little stripes, those arrows on the driveway in and out, left and right?
Yeah, there will be exit right and exit left.
Vice Chairman Young, if there are no other questions, I'll make a motion that we approve subject to all staff comments, including conditions made today.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Our next item is mandatory referrals. We'll do these one at a time. Mr.
You did the first one, I did the second two.
Okay, all right. The first item is mandatory referral for electric easement across Tiger Hill Tank property, Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Corp. And Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department applicants. Ms. Ely?
Thank you. The Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department has a 3MG, and I'm not sure what MG stands for, but a 3 million gallon ground level water storage tank located on the northeastern side of Tiger Hill along County Farm Road, and I believe that we've all seen that tank. The tank is served by Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Corporation, so MTEMC. MTEMC has a main electric line that runs southeast and northwest across the side of Tiger Hill, and there's a map that has a red line, and that electric line is shown in red. MTEMC has indicated to staff that during harsh weather they have a difficult time accessing the main electric line because the hill along the current route is steep and rocky. So they have asked, they being MTEMC, that we consider this mandatory referral. They would like to relocate the electric main along County Farm Road for better access. And then once the new line is relocated along County Farm Road, MTEMC will need to extend a main line over to Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department's existing service and reconnect the service. So MTEMC is requesting a right-of-way easement 20 feet on either side of the main line from County Farm Road to reach the Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department existing service, and then 10 feet on either side of the service line from the point of reconnection up to the tank. The easement is shown as the blue dashed line on the map that you have in your packets, and it's on the screen as well. Thank you, Mr. Huddleston. MTEMC has already obtained easements from the adjacent property owners. They will be removing the old electric line after the new line is serviced, which will likely begin after the new year. This easement must also be submitted as a mandatory referral item to both the Planning Commission and City Council. So because of the change in service and the easements that have been that are going to be abandoned, of course, the ones that are being acquired, it would require you to approve this plan. It's basically just going to improve the access to that main electric line for the electric department, which also serves our water tank. You have a map and a letter, I received a letter from the Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department where they are recommending that this be approved. If you do approve this mandatory referral item, I will send it to City Council for their approval. I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Next item is mandatory referral for property at East Lytle Street and North Spring Street, Mid-South Bank applicant.
I think you missed item B.
Did I skip one?
Yes, sir.
I sure did. Well, let's just go back to the one I skipped. How about mandatory referral for right-of-way request for an approximately 1,350 lineal feet on BC Road north of Warrior Drive? Charles B. Mitchell, applicant.
Yes, sir. Thank you. This is a little bit of an unusual request, and it involves a tract of land that we have formerly known as the Hudson property. The situation is that in the early 2000s, the street known as Beasy Road from Warrior Drive northwards to what was called the Malloy property was subdivided, and the plat was recorded, but only the right-of-way of the street was recorded. A surety was posted for its completion. That was in the early 2000s. That happened along with the construction of the new interchange to give access to the Malloy property in the back. The street was never finished, and before the street was finished, the property in the back changed hands and is now owned by a Mr. Charlie Mitchell and his wife. Also, before it was finished, the property in the front that was formerly the Hudson property that is crossed by this road was also by Mr. Charlie Mitchell and partners. Through quite a bit of and I'm going to call it an ordeal involving a lot of trials and tribulations and frustrations on the part of the staff and the owners, involving the recession. The property has changed hands a couple of times, and there have been some defaults. But at this point, Mr. Mitchell owns, with his wife, the tract in the back, and with his partners, the tract in the front, crossed by the road. What they want to do now is they want to embark upon a different development plan for the property. They're no longer interested in seeing that street located where it was platted and where it currently exists. And they have the ability to move it to a more opportune location because they own both tracts or have controlling interest of both tracts. Mr. Mitchell has requested that what we do is to deed away, to abandon the right-of-way and deed it back to his wife and him. And that allows him to have an unusual shaped parcel with an appendage to a public right-of-way, thereby making it a conforming lot and a legal lot. It would be a flag lot. Ordinarily, we would divide a property right down the center line to the adjacent property owners. Mr. Mitchell and his partners would be those, and they have provided to us a hold harmless and a request that we deed it straight to his wife and him. I believe this is a good solution. This will allow us to release the surety that we're holding and have been holding for some time. It will allow them the flexibility to relocate the road to a different location. It will keep any of the parcels from being landlocked. It will conform to our subdivision regulations, and it will give him more flexibility to embark upon a better development plan than he currently can achieve. This is unusual. It is. This is the story in a nutshell. I will advise you that myself, Mr. Ives, Mr. Richardson, Mr. Huddleston, Mr. Griffith have collectively spent a big part of our careers with the city involved with this property. and we think this is something that will help lessen the city's liability, and it will improve the owner's situation. We believe it is a good result. What we need to do is we do need to have a public hearing on this because there is a public right-of-way. We need to schedule for a public hearing, and we need to then take action to abandon and recommend that the city council authorizes the mayor to sign necessary quitclaim deeds. Because of this unusual situation, I do think the public hearing is necessary because it helps us to cover any of the bases and to get the public input that we would need on this. I would be glad to answer your questions, and I would advise that we need to schedule for a public hearing.
What date do you have in mind, Mr. Tadlock?
December the 6th, is that our next meeting date? December 5th. December 5th would be fine.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Our next item is new business.
No.
Nope, still got the okay, I'm going to get this right eventually. Next is, poor old bank, mandatory referral for property along East Lytle Street and North Spring Street, Mid-South Bank applicant.
Yes, I'll be presenting that. Before we begin to discuss the merits, I want to advise the Planning Commission that my wife is employed by Mid-South Bank. I have advised our city manager of the case, as is required by an ethical disclosure, so that, and I'm letting you know. Of course, I don't make any decisions on this, but I am going to present to you the matter. But I wanted to give you that ethical disclosure as is required. The subject property is located at the block that's bound by North Spring Street, Lytle Street, Church Street, and College Street. It's the home of the Mid-South Bank. The city of Murfreesboro owns a lot on the corner with Spring Street and Lytle Street. It's a parking lot. Several years ago, and I guess that would have been back in the early 2000s, 2003, the Mid-South Bank bought the property that was formerly owned by the Methodist Church, and they were fixing to embark on a reconstruction plan where they would tear down a portion of the property and build new offices and change the parking. At that time, we did exchange some property with them because a portion of the property that involved their access drives and some of their parking was on the city's side of the property line, and likewise some of the city's parking was on their side. So we straightened out the situation in anticipation of the site plan. However, the building plan has never been able to move forward, and they have now visited with me and advised that they no longer have an interest in demolition of the church structure and rebuilding, that they're going to try to repurpose the existing building to keep it and try to use it in the parking lot. They want to now look at straightening out the parking so that the ATM will be on their property and not on the city's, or actually not the ATM, but the ATM drive will be on their property. And a couple of the city's parking spaces that are in our parking lot that are currently on their property will be back on our side. There's an exhibit. It's a little bit crudely drawn because I realized that when I looked at the drawing, I could see what was going on, but just really to highlight, I made a note. The part that would go to the city, that you can see as parking spaces, and the part that would go to Mid-South, that's owned by the city, is in their access drive. What we need to do is to approve this as a mandatory referral. This is a swap of the city's property, and basically it needs to be blessed by the Planning Commission before it goes to the City Council. I will tell the Planning Commission that it basically will be transparent. We won't see any difference. It's just, as our property lines are invisible, we won't see any difference today. Someday, however, we may embark upon a reconstruction of that parking lot, and this will set us up for the right thing to do. We'll be poised to do it right. So I recommend approval of this. I'll be glad to answer your questions. Mr. Ives has been very much part of this discussion. He's aware of it, and he can answer questions if I'm unable to.
Questions?
If there are no questions, I recommend approval.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Our next item is new business. Zoning application for approximately 8 acres along Memorial Boulevard north of Cedar View Drive to be rezoned from RS-15 to CH. Mr. Ray T. Patton, applicant. Mr. Alott?
Ms. Ely's going to
Ms.
handle this
Ely.
one.
Okay, good. Wow, didn't know I could do anything else. So I didn't prepare, so here goes. The first item of new business is to consider a zoning change for approximately 8 acres that's located along the eastern side of Memorial Boulevard, just north of Cedar View Drive. And you can see that it's the property that's shaded orange on the map that you have before you and on the screen.
Purple.
Or purple, sorry. Purple. The map also shows 2 other colors, an orange and a blue area. And we've included those on the map for your reference, just to give you a frame of reference of where the property is located. The area that is shaded the orange color is property that is in the process of being rezoned from RS-15 to CH. As a matter of fact, I think it's on its way to becoming effective, that ordinance. I think it's received third and final reading from City Council, but now it's just a matter of waiting those 15 days after that third and final reading for it to become effective. The same is true for the property that's shaded blue on the map. The property is being rezoned to multifamily, so from single-family residential district, RS-15, to RM-16, multifamily residential district. Now we have received a request from the property owner for the property that's shaded purple. They've asked that you consider changing the property from its RS-15 single-family residential zone to commercial highway zone, CH. I believe this property currently has some mobile homes located on the property, and they have decided that they'd like to change the program on that site. And I think that actually the mobile homes that are located on the site aren't in the best condition, and I don't think that is the place that we take people who visit Murfreesboro to come visit. So it's probably a good thing that the site is that they're looking at redeveloping the property and actually making it something, or having a development that will contribute more to our community. You will need to schedule a public hearing before considering this zoning change request, and staff would recommend that you schedule that public hearing for December 5th. We have room on that agenda if you feel it's appropriate to have that public hearing this evening. If you have any questions, Mr. Adelot will be glad to answer them.
Seeing there are no questions, Mr. Vice Chairman, I recommend that we set up for a public hearing for December the 5th.
Second.
Have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Our next item is a zoning application for approximately 19.5 acres along New Las Casas Highway to be rezoned from PUD to RZ, Investment Partners LLC applicant.
Yes, sir. The subject property is located along the northwest side of New Las Casas Highway. This property is directly across from the Garrison Cove subdivision and south of the villages of Garrison Cove subdivision. This property was approved as a PUD in 2007 That plan included several elements. The first element was a self-storage component on 4.1 acres, and that portion has already been developed, and it's already built, or at least most of it is. A portion of it remains to be constructed, but it's internal to the site. The second area is a drive-in restaurant for, actually, it was identified as a Sonic. That has yet to be constructed. The property has been sold to the Sonic developer, but the construction has never moved forward with it. The third element is a retail component of 40,434 square feet on 4 acres. And the fourth component was a retail component of 2.6 acres. And then the last component was a component for residential condominiums on 15.8 acres, and it would have access directly across from Garrison Cove Drive. There was going to be featuring attached structures with 4 and 6 units per building. You can see on the plan that's on the television monitor the PUD plan. The applicants did make a rezone request 2 or 3 years ago for a multifamily complex on a portion of this property. That plan was denied, although they were looking at a planned development approach for it. It was just a more standard type of apartment complex. This application is to rezone the property that would be in Area E, the residential condominium component, and Area C, the retail component of 40,434 square feet. Rezone that portion of the Emerald Place PUD to RZ. RZ is the same zoning classification as the villages of Garrison Cove. The developers have visited with me. They feel that that the original plan may not be as attractive now as it once was, and they want to pursue a development plan more akin to the villages of Garrison Cove. RZ being the same classification. This would be from the concept plan, and it's only a concept plan at this point that they have showed me, would be about 10 lots more than the original condominium development on the property, but it would also include the acreage where the 40,000 square foot of retail would have gone. So the 40,000 square foot of retail would go away, and the attached structures would go away. It would become a more traditional single-family detached subdivision. I see in the audience Mr. Jewel Hale. He may be represented by Mr. Bill Huddleston. They'd be glad to step forward and answer your questions if you have any questions about their proposed zoning. This will need to be scheduled for a public hearing. I will tell you that during our little neighborhood meeting with the Garrison Cove people, I did, that was formally on the agenda, I did mention this. Actually, I mentioned it at the last public hearing to let them know that this was coming. I felt it was only fair that knowing something was in the making, that I didn't want to blindside them and them show up at a meeting and say, well, you knew about it and didn't say anything. Well, I knew about it and I did say something. I think they were very pleased with what they were seeing. They I think, are glad to see a more traditional residential subdivision. Mr. Huddleston, will you answer questions about the proposed development plan?
Yes, sir, I'll be happy to. Good afternoon, Vice Chairman Young and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Bill Huddleston. I'm here on behalf of Investment Partners, which is Bobby Kirby and Jewel Hale, a couple of developers who have a great track record here in the city of Murfreesboro. And they are looking to rezone this to a more traditional type development. It is, we are asking for RZ, which is the same zoning that abuts the property to the north, but we're looking to develop approximately 71 single-family detached residences, so it'll be a more traditional type neighborhood. We look to call this project Rock Bridge, and the reason is that coming into the development, the developers plan on building a very nice bridge over, I guess it's the Little Ditch, and they're going to have rock on it with some wrought iron treatment as well. So that'll be sort of the focal point for a nice development.
Mr. Huddleston, what is the average square footage for those single?
Don't know what the average is going to be. They're going to set a minimum somewhere around 1,200, but the average will be larger than that.
Building materials, any idea what you're...
There'll be some brick and stone.
What you're describing is the villages of Garrison Cove, aren't you?
I am. A newer version, though.
Right.
Mr. Huddleston, the 40,000 square foot commercial, that's going away? I want to make
Yes,
sure
sir.
I understand that.
That's correct.
Be ready December the 5th, Mr. Adalot.
We'll be ready for the 5th.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next item is an ordinance amendment to amend the zoning ordinance, Section 24, Article 5, PS Plan signage overlay districts, subsection D regarding flag signs, planning staff applicant.
Yes, sir. The provision that we're going to consider now will be an amendment to our zoning ordinance that deals with the section involving plan signage overlay. Plan signage overlay is an overlay district that we place or allow to be placed over property to regulate their signage. When property is placed in the plan signage overlay district zoning classification, they have the ability to create a independent signage regulation program that would be independent of the sign ordinance. They are not permitted to have signs that are prohibited by the sign ordinance, but they can have a variation on what would be permitted. Recently, you may recall, we approved a planned sign overlay for the Amazon. The Amazon is a large campus, a large building with different signage needs because of the way it functions and the way it operates, for the convenience of the people who visit there, as well as the people who make trips in and out for business. And also because of the size of the building. It's so large that a standard size sign would not be visible. As we've been reviewing our planned sign overlay zones and the various properties in them, we realized that we, as a staff, in consultation between myself, Mr. Whitaker, who is our chief building official, Ms. Kerr, who administers the sign orders, and Mr. Ives, that we wanted to make a change in the planned sign overlay district regulations. We have found that almost every business desires to be able to display flags, the American flag, the state flag, sometimes another flag. Any development, and pretty much any development in the city, can have three flag signs, 3 flags. And we believe that's very proper and appropriate, and we believe that we want to preserve that ability. We noticed that in a planned sign overlay, that if you will write flags into your planned sign overlay program, you can have flags. But if you fail to write them in, well, you can't do it until you write them in. So what we're proposing is that any development that is in planned sign overlay is entitled to have flags as if they were in their underlying zone. So if they are in the HI district, as Amazon is, for example, and they are in the planned sign overlay to regulate their signage on site, they could have flags just like their neighbors who are not in the planned sign overlay without having to write it into the program book. We recognize that a lot of times people don't equate flags to signage. We believe this is a good approach. We've discussed it internally as staff, and we are now asking you to discuss it and to consider this amendment to our zone ordinance. And if you are in agreement, which we hope that you are, we would recommend that the public hearing be December the 5th. You have in your materials a copy of a proposed ordinance that we've drafted that we recommend. It still can be changed if you all have some wording changes, but we think this covers the bases we're trying to achieve.
I think it's a very logical approach to the situation. Move for public hearing December 5th.
Second.
Have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Our next item is Bikeway, Blueway, and Greenway Master Plan, Planning Commission, and Recreation Staff applicants.
Yes, sir. The City Council, Planning Commission, Recreation Commission, and Greenways Committee met in a joint session in this room on October 22nd of 2012. We heard a lengthy and very detailed presentation on a proposed master plan for greenways, blueways, and bikeways for our city. The city of Murfreesboro already has a bikeways and greenways master plan, and that was adopted back in the 1990s. It's getting to be time that we look to update it. There's been a lot of change in the community, and the program that they have had master planned has begun to mature. It's time to look ahead into our next plan horizon for the greenways, blueways and bikeways. They're adding a new component, and that being the blueways. That's be things like our streams, Stones River, East Fork, West Fork, Middle Fork, Lotta Creek, Overall Creek, anywhere else that might have the ability to be used for recreational or transportation purposes as a water body. We heard the presentation, and I don't particularly think that there's a need for another presentation today, but what we do need to do in order to move forward with this is to schedule it for a public hearing. This is a master plan. It's not a rezoning. As I have become very much aware, and I sometimes reflect on, we need 30 days notice for our advertisement rather than just a 15-day or so. We need to schedule this for January the 9th rather than December the 6th. So if you're in agreement to move forward with scheduling for a public hearing, we would want to schedule for that date. We do have with us Mr. Jeff Hammonds with RPM. He's the consultant working this program. He made the presentation along with Mr. John Lavender with Lawson Associates at the joint meeting. If there are questions, we'll be glad to answer them. Otherwise, we need to move forward to schedule this public hearing.
And I have made an effort to put this information on City's homepage for anybody who's interested in this plan. I'll have it. It's not on your packets because I didn't have it then, but it will be should be up today. I've been working with our cable department to get that so that if anybody's interested in reading it or providing comments before the meeting, they can have some time to digest that. I just want to make sure that everybody knew it would be available.
And along those lines, I'll just first thing to the Planning Commission, but now to any members of the public in the audience, we have a copy in our office. If anybody wants to come down and look at those copies, they're welcome to come. We want people to see these. We've had a number of public meetings on this already, but we want people to be aware of it. And as Ms. Ely said, we'll have a copy of it posted on our website so that people can download it or review it on the city's website at www.murfreesborotn.gov. If you got trouble finding it, you're welcome to email me or Ms. Ely. We'll get you on the right track.
All right. We set the public hearing date, so
January 9th.
January 9th.
January the 9th, okay. Our next item is staff report and other business.
Well, I think we need a motion.
We need a motion.
For the date out there, we just
Okay.
haven't moved on yet.
Okay.
Make a motion, we set a public hearing for January 9th.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes January the 9th. Thank you. All right, I'm afraid to proceed because I've got so many wrong today already, but if I'm reading this correctly, the next item is staff reports and other business. State lot?
Yes, sir. The first staff report that I have, I want to talk with the Planning Commission a little bit about a Walmart Supercenter that is proposed on Memorial Boulevard. I think you have seen some email correspondence where I alerted the council and yourself that we had received a site plan a couple of weeks ago for a Walmart Supercenter to be located along Memorial Boulevard, along the north side of Airport Road in front of the airport terminal. The property is across the street from Adams Place. The property has been zoned commercial highway, during my entire tenure with the city, which began in 1984. It was zoned in that manner before I got here, and presumably before the city undertook the comprehensive rezoning in 1984. I say presumably because I really have not looked. That's almost 25 years that it's been zoned that way. The property consists of several parcels. Part of it is a commercial subdivision under the name of Huddleston Oil Subdivision that was subdivided in the mid-1980s. A part of it involves some existing parcels that had single-family homes on them, even though it was zoned commercial highway. The site plan is going to involve quite a bit of change to the land, and we understand that this is something that the community is very much interested in. I recognize that immediately. I alerted our city manager when I received the plan, and then alerted the city council and planning commission members. This came up for discussion a couple of weeks ago at at a city council meeting, where some of the council members wanted to discuss how to react to it and how we should. I think there was some sentiment that maybe we ought to get some public input, and there was discussion about whether it ought to be a public hearing or it ought to be a public meeting or a neighborhood meeting or what. Part of my responsibility for the city is to maybe provide some leadership on what to do in terms of what we have the ability to do. So I'm advise the council that I would do that. What I'm going to propose, and I have discussed this with the city manager. I've also sent an email to the council members since they had initiated the discussion. I sent an email outlining what I'm going to propose to you. And I have not yet heard any input back from most of the council members. A couple of them have called back and said it seems like a good approach. So what I'm proposing is that we will have a neighborhood meeting on December the 10th. It will start at 6:30 p.m. and it will be held at the Sportscom. I have already reserved a room at the Sportscom in anticipation of this. This meeting will be an open house meeting because what we want to do is help people to see the plan, to understand the plan, and to be able to react to that plan. I expect that there will be most of my staff in attendance because we'll be manning these stations. One station will be set aside for basic traffic implications, traffic management, the roadway improvements, the access to the site, that sort of thing, new traffic signals, etc. A second station will be set aside for drainage, how we're going to manage the drainage or how the drainage is proposed to be managed, where it goes, who will be affected, the methodology, how they're going to treat their stormwater, the sort of things that go with managing stormwater. A third station will deal with landscaping and on site and around the perimeter and buffering, how we're going to buffer the site. A fourth site will deal with building appearance, what the building will look like, how it will relate to the street, how it will be viewed from the public realm, how it will be viewed from the airport. We may or may not have another station, I'm still working on this, that will deal with what I call general site plan issues. It will be our effort to let people review the plans and understand those plans. We will offer some explanation if they have questions. It will not be our effort to advocate for or against the plan. It will be our effort to explain about the plan because we want people to understand. When you have understanding, you have the ability to participate more effectively. We will invite anybody who wants to, whether they attend or whether they do not attend, to provide us written comments. We will set up a site on our city's website for people to email comments to the city, and whether they are signed or anonymous, we don't care. We do prefer signed comments. I guess that's human nature, but it's not going to be a necessity. All comments will be received. All comments will be put together in a package for council and planning commission members. The Planning Commission can expect that the matter will be on our regular agenda on December the 19th as a site plan submission. Now, that will be a public meeting, but it's not set up as a public hearing in the sense of a rezoning, because you will not be making a recommendation. You will be taking action, and your ability will be to approve, conditionally approve, or deny. We'll elaborate more on that at the meeting and in our staff comments. The staff, in the meantime, we're going to be seeking out what I call special stakeholders. One of them being the representatives of Adams Place. I have already scheduled a meeting for my staff, and particularly our city engineer and his environmental engineer, and our traffic director and transportation director, to meet with the representatives of Adams Place. After all, they share an interest that's going to be affected, and we want them to understand the plans and to give us feedback. They have a big stake there. We also have a big interest in drainage from them. They share a drainage system, so we want to have them to have their engineers review the plans and to be able to give us feedback to their belief as to how it will affect Adams Place, because we do not want an adverse impact, and we want them to have that opportunity. I will be meeting with the Airport Commission along with some of the other staff, and I believe the engineers for Walmart will be making an effort to attend that meeting as well. I will tell you that our staff has met with the Walmart design team. We've had a very good session where we identified quite a number of items that we felt should be addressed that were not addressed on the original site plan that was submitted for our review. That's not uncommon. It's a big plan. It's a complex plan. It involves a lot of things, and some of them are subjective. We have reviewed their plan and have given them some feedback. Some of it involves some comprehensive improvements to Airport Road. We view Airport Road as a street that needs to be upgraded considerably. So we've given them feedback. On-site pedestrian circulation is important to us. How pedestrian circulation connects to the public realm is important to us. On-site lighting. So we identified quite a number of things that they're currently working on, and they've got their work cut out between now and the resubmittal deadline on December 3rd. So that's the game plan I've outlined for you. I would like your feedback. If you think this is the right course of action, I would like you to validate my plan. If you think I've gone wrong or would like me to approach something else, I want to hear it so I can incorporate it into my plans.
Can I ask a quick
Oh,
question?
absolutely. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Jones.
Can you tell me again what was the date you said for the public meeting?
The neighborhood meeting will be December 10 at 6:30 until 8:30.
At Sports.
And it will be an open house, so that anybody who's interested can come anytime during that period of time to review the plans, and so they don't have to arrive there promptly at 6:30 to line up to speak at a microphone. They will be able to come anytime during that window of opportunity to review the plans, and for a couple of days thereafter, will be able to provide us comments.
And so by the 10th, will the Planning Commission, will we have our copies of that site plan and all that information by that time?
No, ma'am, I doubt that you will. However,
What happens the next morning at 8 o'clock when our emails start going off and our phones start
We haven't
going off?
seen
And we
anything.
haven't seen
Well,
anything?
what I was going to say is I think I can get you an advanced copy so that you can see the plan. I can endeavor to get you something. I've got to work my time frames out. I will do something to help you to have some information.
Sure.
I will tell you that you'll be able to log on to the same site. We're going to try to have a copy of the plan on the city's website, so you'll have that ability too, and maybe even able to download it on your iPad. In fact, as you say, Ms. Jones, maybe that would be the best thing for us to put something on there, like your Planning Commission agenda, that you can download onto your iPad. And anybody will be able to see
Let us
it.
know when it's available.
I think you need to do that for this commission and the council as well, because like Kathy's saying, somewhere around 8:45 on the night of the 10th and the next morning, the emails and the phone calls are going to start pouring in, and then we need that information.
We'll be glad to do it. And I would advise anybody that's interested, if anything they want me to get to you, I'll be glad to. If they get it to me, I'll get it directly to you. It'll be a couple of days as I package it up. Everybody will have a chance to comment.
The land or the proposed site, what borders it to the east?
To the east is land that is owned by the Murfreesboro Airport, and the city of Murfreesboro, and it's developed with the airport.
Mr. Aylott, I'd like to see something put in about maybe a possible rover bus stop somewhere in this particular.
We did discuss that briefly with them about how that would be done, and that was still something we're still fleshing out, because we do think that would be something that would be a good idea, particularly rather than having it stop on the street if it would congest traffic.
I don't think
That is an issue that we're still working on.
Mr. Taylor, back to your original question as to our thoughts on the process that you developed to go forward with. I think you put a lot of thought into that, and I think it is a good process to try to move things forward with this, to get the public's input on it, because this is going to be a very complicated matter to review and try to decide upon. How many acres are the two current Walmarts that we have here? What do they sit on?
I didn't prepare myself for that, but I will give you my impression of what my recollection is.
Ballpark, I'll hold you.
They're in a neighborhood of 22 to 25 acres.
And this is a 17-acre site.
Yes. I will tell you there's a little bit of difference in both of them. Both of the other Walmarts have fueling facilities. Both of them have gas, the Murphy oils. Both of them have out parcels. This site does not have any out parcel, and this site does not have a fueling facility.
I think the other issue I think we'll be faced with this too, both of the other two Walmarts and the third one that we just reviewed today, where they're located, they were the first big thing in each of those areas, so to speak, as far as development is concerned in a lot of ways. And this is an area that's already tightly developed.
I would tell you, you're very right. The Walmart on South Rutherford was the first thing out there. I mean, it was the pioneer. It was the game changer. That was a lot of raw land out there, and when it came, it was by itself, but everything came around it. The apartments may have been there, but there was no commercial development. The one on 04, of course, it was already it followed the Stones River Mall,
Right.
but it was still a pioneer out towards Thompson Lane. There really was only very little, very small amount of commercial development in that area when it came. It preceded the Target. It preceded the Oaks Village. Even though the Stones River Mall was there, it was the first thing that far out.
Actually, before Stones River Mall, the Stones River Mall wasn't.
Walmart was in
the
there.
Walmart there before it moved up the street, so to speak. So it
that
really
is-
was the pioneer out there.
That's correct. Walmart was one of the original tenants in the Stones River Mall.
Right.
And Mr. A-Lot, just to kind of clarify for us and particularly for a lot of the people that have been calling and emailing and the questions regarding exactly what we will do as a planning commission with this particular item. As site plan review, when we look at a site plan, we're looking basically at a footprint of a building on a site, and we're studying the parking, we're studying the drainage, we're studying the traffic, we're looking at the dumpster areas and all of those things. To us, that footprint of that building could be a Walmart, it could be a Costco, it could be a Target, it could be all these other things that some people would like to see on this spot, but to us, that the name on that means nothing as far as whether we approve or don't approve anything on that site plan. The site plan review is to determine whether they've met all the requirements of the city building and codes and et cetera. And it's that, can you just confirm whether I'm
Yes,
going in
ma'am.
the right direction on
You
that?
are going in the correct direction. In fact, I would add for planners, particularly AICP planners, and really anybody in the planning profession at a staff level, we have an ethical obligation to review it without the title being what's reviewed. We have an obligation to review the form and how it compares to the city's regulations. And I will stress that's an ethical obligation. We should not be looking at the name on the box. Plan Commission members are not AICP, but I do think that you have an obligation to review the form and not the title on the box. Does it conform with the regulations that are in place? The landscaping, the parking, the setbacks, the building height, the arrangement and access, is it built in a way that's going to be convenient? Does it drain to our standards? And we have standards on how it's supposed to be draining. Does it meet the design storm? And that's when we have a city engineer to review. Does it do the stormwater treatment that is part of our stormwater ordinance? Is the building oriented correctly? Does it have proper public interface, meaning does it have proper access? You can go beyond that, and as you go beyond that, it's a delicate matter, but it's actually an important matter. What kind of conditions can be placed to mitigate the impacts that it will be having? For instance, the roadway improvements. They're not on site. They are really public realm things. But the need for right turn lanes. Are the turn lanes long enough? Do they have enough taper? Are they built correctly? Are they at the right locations? Is a signal warranted? Is the traffic signal designed right? How does that signal impact the adjacent property? Those are not strict on-site site plans because they're public realm. They're sort of an exercise of subdivision authority that gets intermingled with site plan review that's inherent with it. And then, are the exactions, the things you're going to require them to do in the public realm, are they reasonable? In some places where there are impact fees, there may not be any requirement for a developer to build those sort of things because they pay an impact fee and it is the community's responsibility. We don't have a roadway impact fee in Murfreesboro, so we have the ability to make a reasonable exaction to demand of the developer that they do things in the public realm. For instance, add a travel lane to Airport Road, put a left turn lane in Airport Road. Rebuild the curbs and gutters and sidewalks, rebuild the street roadway because it's inadequate to handle your traffic. Is the lighting sufficient? Those, if they are reasonable, will stand up to a challenge. And in fact, the developer will be willing to do it. A reasonable developer, if your exactions are reasonable, will be willing to do what the community demands. On the other hand, if the city demands of it that is something that is unreasonable, and you don't always know what something's unreasonable until you talk about it. But then they may have a reason to say, you're being unreasonable. Nah, we don't want to go there yet. I don't want to go too far in that discussion because I don't know what may come of this discussion. But I can tell you that my discussions with Walmart today have been, they're very open to anything we've been talking about that's been, that the city has brought up for improvement of their plan. They've not said, no, we're not going to do that. They have not. They've been, we're willing to do what's reasonable. I think that these developers and their design team, they've been to a lot of communities. They are aware that when they come to a community, there's a lot of concern. They're aware that they will have an impact. They are aware that when they develop, they have an obligation to mitigate adverse impacts that can be mitigated. So they're aware of what is going to be expected. And to date, they have been very willing to work with us. But bear in mind, the same team has worked with us on the South Church site, so we've got to know them a little bit and how they think and how they design. They know a little bit about how we think and how we regulate and review.
Thank you.
Questions or comments?
So the one thing I'm hearing is my approach seems to be good. You want to be armed with more information so that when people start calling you, you will have something to be able to discuss with them and to react to so that you know what they're talking about. If they've seen it and you hadn't, it's very awkward for you. We will endeavor to make sure that you have something so that you will have the same things that people are reacting to you about. Anything else?
My question, Mr. Taylor, is there adequate time between the 10th and the 19th this is a big apple to bite?
Mr. Young, actually, for what I'm proposing, I think that there is. Bear in mind that the clock really started back 2 weeks ago when they turned in their first site plan, and I got the word out about it. We still got some time, but I think that if things are, I think that the applicant may be willing to work with us still if there's reason to hold off, and they may be the ones asking for it. Who knows? They want to do a good job on their plans.
I just know into the 19th that week is a lot of travel time for people and things like that. I just don't want to.
Well, as a gesture of good faith on their part, when I begin to discuss within the community concerns and the council discussion, and reviewed the calendar and said, well, your site plan is going to be on Thursday, November 21st, the day before Thanksgiving. It's probably not a good day to have it on the Planning Commission agenda. Can you wait till the next month? They said, very willing. We'll do it. That's not a problem. We'll see what they want to do next month, and we'll see where we're at after the neighborhood meeting, Mr. Young.
I just want everyone to have an opportunity to put their 2 cents worth into this. And I think you set up a model for a public meeting and website and web page and every kind of communications that the public can communicate with both the Planning Commission and the council on this, but primarily the Planning Commission, because that's where it's going to be. Any other questions or comments? I guess we're...
So I'm hearing no need for a motion, but what I'm hearing is move forward as I have outlined.
Correct.
Very good.
Press on.
That's that report. My next one, if you're ready to move on.
We're ready to move on.
I think all of the Plan Commission members have gotten their education for this year. All the plan staff has gotten all theirs. I think we're squared away. We've met our obligations again, and maybe a little bit early. Nobody had to watch the videos. So we're real proud of you, and it's been a good year. That's all my staff reports.
The only thing I have is I'd like to wish everyone a safe and happy and prosperous Thanksgiving holiday. I think we all need it. With that, we are adjourned.